Hello. Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. We cover career, practice tips, leadership, the future of law, mental health, legal tech, and much, much more. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Want to get the most from this conversation? Ask questions, comment, follow, say hello. In short, engage. Finally, have fun. In-house legal practice is a serious business, but you don't have to take yourself seriously. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Notes to My Legal Self, a place where we discuss everything relevant to in-house professional, all kinds of things, from career to substantive practice to how to show up well, how to manage teams, and all kinds of other stuff. And today I have a very special guest, somebody you probably have seen on LinkedIn. He does get around. He's someone who's written a couple of books. And without further ado, Peter, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Olga. It's great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. So, yeah, I'm Peter Connor. I'm sitting here in Sydney, Australia, the other side of the world from many of you. I was a general counsel for about 25 odd years. I worked in the States for a little while, but also in Asia and Europe and Australia. And recently, what I've been doing is, for the last 9 years or so, just focused on helping particularly in-house legal teams to work in different ways and to use not just technology, but to actually change the way they work to be more effective. And I've centered those ideas around this T-shaped lawyer idea, which we can talk about a little bit more later.
Absolutely. We will definitely have conversations about T-shaped lawyers, what it means and how to use it in your daily practice in-house. You mentioned that you were in-house for a few years, more like a few decades. So would love to, so you situate people in this conversation and your perspective. How did you get to be where you are today, which is writing books and sharing your knowledge? What did you do before that?
So really, the things that I teach in my workshops and the programs and theories, and now what I put in my books are really just from my own personal experience as a general counsel. They're things that worked for me and that people often don't talk about a lot. So I was fortunate enough to be able to start my international career by leaving Australia, going to Hong Kong initially, and then just from there moving around different parts of the world. So that's really it's this diversity, if you will, of experience that has really helped me to see things quite differently. And it's something I encourage others to do. It's not a straight linear career path these days. It doesn't need to be. In fact, it shouldn't be.
And was it mostly in-house or were you at a law firm?
I started at Baker & McKenzie, Olga, and worked for them in Sydney and in Hong Kong, and then went in-house, as you say, a long time ago, many decades ago in the 80s, just literally as the in-house profession was really getting going, to be honest. That's how ancient I am. But yeah, so mainly in-house in tech companies, Sun Microsystems and Citrix Systems, and worked with them all over the world in various roles. Had that, and then from there, I moved into working for a tech company. I actually managed some techies to develop software and different platforms and things before then getting back into the law, albeit in this different vein.
I love the richness of your career, both on the tech side and law side, and your Australian perspective. All of that sounds very exciting. So you've written a couple of books. One of them you've written recently. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your recent book and your prior book.
The book that I've just published on Amazon, you can see it in the screen behind me there, as those who are actually watching. It's called The T-Shaped Lawyer, A New Vision for You and Your Work. And it's actually a rewrite of a book that I published earlier this year, which had a slightly different title. And the reason I've rewritten it is because in the process of writing my second book, which is called The T-Shaped Lawyer Guidebook, a framework for your professional development, it actually made me rethink some of the things in the first book. So what I think this new version of the book, which is out on Amazon now, available, what it's about really is the idea of what a T-shaped lawyer is and why it's so important to be one. And the second book is how to be a T-shaped lawyer through professional development.
Love it. Okay. It is when you perfect yourself, you achieve greatness. So I'm going to ask the obvious question that one would ask at this point. What is
That's the $1 million question. And I think that's something that most people misunderstand. I think if you ask most people that question, they would say it's someone who develops a lot of non-legal skills, right? That's the essence of it. But in fact, that's how to be a T-shaped lawyer. That's not what a T-shaped lawyer is. A T-shaped lawyer is in the way I describe it in the book, is a business person, not just a lawyer, who provides business input and advice, not just legal advice, and does business work, not just legal work, for the benefit of the business of the client organization, not just the legal department. Now, that's quite a mouthful, but each of those words are carefully chosen. And that's all described, all of that detail of what is business work, what is business advice, what does it mean to be a business person, is stuff that's all spelled out very clearly in the book. So it's very important.
And the T-shape, what does it capture?
The T-shape thing, the reason I've chosen the T-shape concept to capture this idea, it's also really another analogy is an expert generalist, so a legal expert, business generalist. But the T-shape idea, and the reason I like it is because it captures the idea that most professionals are I-shaped. In other words, they're very deep expertise in one area. In the case of lawyers, it's the law. But frankly, limited expertise and experience and skill sets and capabilities beyond that core area of expertise. A T-shaped professional is someone who still is an expert, still has their expertise, but increasingly develops some capabilities and some experience and does work outside their core area of expertise. And this T-shaped professional concept is something that's very popular in the business world for all sorts of functions. So all finance, marketing, accounting, and I've just applied the T-shaped professional concept to lawyers.
So the STEM part of it refers to the subject matter expertise, and the flat horizontal part of it refers to essentially business knowledge, experience, relevant. That would be relevant for that expertise or frankly any other in your industry.
That's right, business, but also business work. So that's why I've distinguished between what a T-shaped lawyer is, and that's someone who does this work. So if you look at, I've actually got a slide I can show you, and it's in the book, which is that the horizontal piece of the T is really the piece that teases out the work that lawyers do. So we do legal work, of course, and that's down the I, but across the horizontal bit, there's business work. And there's actually two types of business work that lawyers do to some extent or are involved in. One is what I call internal business work, and that's in an in-house legal department. That's largely legal operations. So if you think about all the stuff that legal operations people do, then that's internal business work. That's not legal work, but it's internal. It's for the benefit of the legal department primarily. What I'm talking about is, so a T-shaped lawyer needs to understand that and support that, and in some cases do it where there is no legal operations people. But more importantly, it's this other piece, this client business work, which is the idea of providing business advice and input and doing business work. And I use the ideas of business partnering and business leadership to capture those two ideas.
Okay. Let me see. Let's focus a little bit on the business part of it.
Yep.
The lawyer as a business professional, and it sounds like a business professional first. And I like it how you broke it down into two components, the partnership component, and what was the other component?
Business leadership.
The leadership component.
Yeah.
Maybe walk me through what that means and how would it change an average in-house professional job today?
Yep. So what's interesting, let me just start by saying what's interesting about this is that some in-house lawyers do this to some extent already. But from my experience, and I've worked with thousands of lawyers in my workshops all over the world, many do not do it. And they certainly don't do it as much as they could do it. And even those that do it don't call it out and don't spell it out. And in fact, this is the real secret sauce. This is the bit that clients really value. This is the bit that will get you promoted, not excellence in the law. So I'll say that as an introductory comment. But to answer your question, so business partnering, think about it. So that's just the idea of, and by the way, that's different from being a business partner. Most people, when they talk about business partnering, talk about the noun, being a business partner. That's a necessary but not sufficient condition to engage in the verb business partnering. And business partnering is simply the idea of providing business input and advice, which typically is done in conjunction with legal advice, but not necessarily. So that could be something like pointing out a business problem, joining the dots between what the person you're speaking to is proposing to do and what somebody else in the company is doing. It could be highlighting potential problems with some of the ideas that's being discussed, pointing out non-legal risks, business risks, reputational risks, all those sorts of things. So business partnering is a simple idea. It's, if you like, it's at one end of the spectrum of helping business to achieve their objectives. It's the end which doesn't need to take very long. You can do it today, you can do it tomorrow, and do it very informally. Whereas business leadership, we'll talk about in a minute, is the other end of the spectrum.
Let's talk about the leadership portion of it. What is it? And maybe some examples of how you do it better.
Yeah. So business leadership is really the other end of the spectrum. It's the idea that and I explained the distinction between the two in the book quite clearly. So here you are actually taking time to work on business projects, or at least to identify potential problems, business problems that need to get solved. And you're pointing those out, you're getting together with a cross-functional team and helping out to the extent that you can. And so that's the thing. I won a business leadership award at Sun Microsystems, and I mentioned that in the book. And as part of that, examples of that include things like, for example, we had at Sun Microsystems, we had various business units that were doing things not in a very coordinated way. And so that was creating problems, business problems, because one part of the business was negotiating terms with a big strategic client, and then the other part of the business would come in and it'd be difficult. They'd have to try and renegotiate things. So we ended up putting together what we call the deal management process. So for any strategic customer, you would get together internally with the key stakeholders from each of the business units, and then you would agree on an appropriate arrangement for that particular strategic customer. And we do it in a coordinated way. And that was me driving that together with my legal colleagues. That's not legal work. And that took a bit of time and a bit of effort to do that. So that's one example of a few that I mentioned in the book of leadership. And so where you want to get to with this idea is you want to be freeing yourself up from the day-to-day low value work that you might be doing today to be able to spend more time doing this more strategic business leadership work. And I call it leadership because you don't have authority over these other functions. So you have to influence them in order to help solve these problems and innovate for the organization as a whole.
So I find it interesting where you said that the partnership portion of it is much more sort of short-term oriented. You can implement it right away, versus the leadership portion of it is much more, I think, long-term focused. Help me understand why and how the two of them contrast if you're developing those skills.
That's right, Olga. So if you think about business partnering, it's really the idea of just providing business input and advice. And that's normally done on a one-on-one basis where someone's come to you for advice, maybe legal advice, and they're talking about a transaction or a matter, and you give them some input or advice on that to help reach an optimal outcome in that particular transaction or matter. And so that's why it's something that can be done relatively easily, quickly, without adding a lot of extra time. And it adds some value. There's definitely more value by doing that, but it's not necessarily strategic. Whereas business leadership is where you identify, problems, big systemic problems, resource gaps, process issues, system failures, or whatever it might be in your organization. And you actually take the time then to go and drive and help solve that problem for the company. So you're actually going outside your lane, so to speak, in order to do that. But that's where you're adding, typically it's more strategic and adding a lot more value, but it does require a lot more time to do that. So that's the difference between the two.
And in the context of in-house professionals, do you feel that both parts, the partnership and the leadership part, are sort of equal opportunity independent of your seniority level, duration in the organization? Or how do you think?
Let's say you're a junior lawyer or someone new to the organization, you're probably unlikely to be diving into business leadership right from the outset. But business partnering, this idea of providing business advice and input, is something that every lawyer can do literally from the start. So that's why I call it a spectrum. So you can start with business partnering, and then over time, as you get to know the business better, as your relationships with your key internal stakeholders improves, then you'll start to see these opportunities for business leadership. So in practice, it's true that you won't spend a lot of time doing business leadership. It's something you'll do occasionally. It's not a daily thing. But when you do see an opportunity to do that, it might only be once a year. The opportunity to work on that is one where you can add significant value to the organization. Whereas business partnering is something you can do at any level, no matter how junior, if you just spot an issue and you help someone come to a better outcome.
I do want to talk a lot more about how, but actually before how, let's talk about why.
Yep.
Because why is actually, I think, the more important question. And you just explained the T-shaped framework where you have a deep legal expertise, and through partnership and leadership, you are able to add value, tremendous value on the business side. And I would definitely want to root that theoretical conversation in the practical. What can I do on the day one, and how should I think about it going forward? But before the how, I want to understand why embrace this framework. What would it do for an individual in-house professional? And what kind of short, medium, long-term impacts? Or I just asked 100 questions. So I hope you're good at keeping up to should expect.
That's the second. I have to devote a whole chapter or two to this in the book, the first two chapters in the book. So there's a lot going on, right, in the world. And that's my first chapter, the changing landscape. We don't have time to get into that, but clearly there's a lot of change. And the change is somewhat different than perhaps in the past when I first started working. It's what I call discontinuous change. In other words, the past is no longer the reference that it once was to the future, because it could be completely different. There's that context. And then in terms to answer your question, on the surface, in-house lawyers are doing okay, right? There are some layoffs in the US and other parts of the world in certain sectors, but generally speaking, you can find a job, you can get good work. But when you scratch the surface a little bit, as I do when I do these workshops, you'll see that there's lots of frustrations and aspirations that lawyers have that they're not actually being met. And for example, a lot of lawyers feel that they're doing great work, but that their work isn't appreciated by their clients as much as they think it should be. They're not being valued as much. And so that's one example of many different things. And so how do you add more value? Not really by just doing better legal work. You can draft a better contract, you can make that legal advice better and better, but that's not the thing that's going to make a difference to clients. And it's not the thing that's going to make a difference to your career, to being promoted into a more senior role, to becoming a GC or whatever it might be. The thing that's going to make a difference is this business work and this capability to do that. That's the thing that makes it, I call it the dark art of practicing law as an in-house lawyer. And what I'm trying to do is shine a bright light on this thing that not many people talk about. And yet it's the very thing that makes the difference. And so in short, it's how can you add more value? If I wrap it up into one kind of what I call the paramount change objective, it's how can you as an in-house lawyer add more value? And if you can, and the answer is by being a T-shaped lawyer and doing business work, not just legal work. If you add more value, then you will be more valued and it will lead to other good things. So that's really at the heart of this idea and why it's so important to you and to being fulfilled in your work and to being successful in your career.
So you mentioned something interesting, which is this, what you I think called discontinued change. And you mentioned it's basically, I think if I were to summarize that, your past is not a good blueprint for the future. And that given that this is the reality, and I'm curious to one that you confirm the definition of that and what leads to this, you using this framework will help you navigate a situation where there's no playbook.
Yes, that's right. So if you think about it, lawyers, because of this narrow, think of back to the T again, this narrow eye, that most lawyers are eye-shaped, right? Most professionals are eye-shaped. That leaves you vulnerable to change. It's difficult to adapt. You've got a very narrow value proposition, to use that idea. And there's certainly value in being a lawyer. There's no doubt about that. Being a lawyer, doing legal work adds a certain level of value to an organization. But you can add more value by expanding and going beyond that. And also you can expand your adaptability and your resilience and prepare yourself for the future better if you are developing this horizontal level in terms of not just skills, but doing work beyond your core area of expertise. That's what's going to prepare you better for the future, whatever that might be. And that becomes all the more important when you think about ChatGPT, generative AI, and all those things that, as Richard Susskind would say, increasingly capable machines that are increasingly encroaching on the type of work that lawyers currently do today. If that work is shrinking, you got to find new things to do. And my book and the ideas behind it gives you some solutions to that.
I love that. Peter, the framework is very interesting, and you mentioned that it is used in other contexts, not just law. Where have you seen it be used successfully? Which examples have inspired you to apply it to law?
Yeah, so great question. So as I said before, it's something that pretty much if you Google the T-shaped HR, marketing, tech, IT, whatever person, you'll see articles on it. So it's an idea that is popular, not just in the legal profession, but frankly in many other. And the reason for that is because it goes to the heart of the T-shaped professional concept, is companies want individuals working for them who are able to collaborate with their cross-functional colleagues in order to solve complex problems and to innovate for the organization as a whole. And it's difficult to do that if you have just this narrow kind of focus. You don't understand the language, the ideas of the other functions. So that's why it's so important and why other functions do this. And people are hearing about my framework and my ideas, and I'm starting to do, I did a gig the other day for this public relations agency out of Asia, and they wanted to apply these concepts of business partnering and business leadership to their government affairs specialists and to their back office finance and admin people. So these ideas translate very well. I do workshops and people from HR and innovation come into the workshops and go, crikey, this really works well for us too. And it does. So the principles are very broadly applicable across the board because they allow individuals to work better together in collaboration with other cross-functional colleagues.
Cross-functional and sounds cross-border too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. And what you're doing essentially is the idea is broadening your capabilities and your understanding and your ability to contribute. That's really at the heart of this whole T-shaped lawyer idea. And by the way, it's not just T-shaped lawyers. Of course, we've got lots of legal operations folks in legal departments now increasingly. And I explain in the book, although the book's primarily about lawyers, I explain how this concept can apply to legal ops people and to other professionals.
No, you can definitely see legal professionals of all sorts. The legal departments and law firms are increasingly full of professionals who don't necessarily have a legal degree at all, or in the correct one in the jurisdiction, and may have multidisciplinary training. So I was listening to what you were saying in terms of why and what of this T-shaped model, and I thought of, was going mentally through my head. We have been emphasizing the in-house professionals being business leaders first, being at least business minded, if not business focused. There's a lot of words for this. In some ways it's new, in some ways it's new flavor of the same old spice, so to speak. So I'm curious, I love the sort of the visualness of it. It definitely brings it home. But if you were looking back in your career, which in-house has been much longer than mine was about 15 years or so, how is what you are suggesting, the T-shaped framework, how it is taking this old, saying of being business minded and business focused first and being a business lawyer to a different level? Or how is it different?
I'm glad you raised that, Olga, because you're quite right. There's a lot of people who are increasingly starting to recognize the importance of business. And so, yes, you hear expressions like business minded and being a business partner. As I say, and I wrote an article about this for ACC Docket not so long ago, it's really important to be precise about the language of change. And frankly, it's quite ironic. Lawyers are very precise when it comes to the law itself, but frankly, very imprecise when it comes to language of change. So let's take business-minded. So what I'm suggesting, I'm not saying lawyers should be business-minded. They should be, but I'm saying more than that. So it's one thing to be business-minded. In other words, business-minded means you've got a business acumen, you understand the business. Of course, that's important. But I'm saying more than that. I'm saying you need to be a business person. And I've actually come up with this idea of the business person mindset. And I explain that in the book, what that means. And that's in contrast to having just a lawyer mindset. So it's one step further than being business-minded. And that distinction is crucially important. It changes everything. So I'm actually not saying the same thing as other people are saying.
So
I'm saying,
what is at the heart of that distinction?
Okay, so for that particular point, the difference is having a business person mindset is literally thinking of yourself as if you are a business person working in your organization, an owner, as it were. And so you are thinking about the business all the time. And you're thinking about not just incorporating business so that you can give good legal advice, but actually how you can help the business from a business point of view. And there's a series of checklists and things you can assess yourself to find whether you apply to this or not. So it's more than just understanding the business. That's necessary, but not sufficient to be a business person and to act and to think and act as if you are a business person. So the thinking part of it is the mindset, and the acting part of it is to do business work. So it's not about giving business-oriented legal advice. That's great. I'm talking about doing business work in addition to legal work and giving legal advice. Different thing.
Thank you for explaining that. That's very helpful. Anything else?
Just say for business partnering, let's take that as another example. Again, as I mentioned, most people think of business partnering as being a business partner, the noun. But actually what I'm talking about is more, that's necessary, but not sufficient to engage in business partnering. That's the act of actually doing something, of giving business advice and input. You can be a business partner and just give legal advice, commercial legal advice, but just legal advice. But I'm talking about engaging in business partnering. So again, that's a distinction. And the book's full of all these distinctions between what most people talk about, and what I'm talking about. It's different. And it's different primarily because I'm talking about lawyers being business people, not just lawyers, and doing business work, not just legal work.
So we're coming to the end. I have a few more questions, and I really want to focus on the how. What is practical things I can do?
Let me answer that in a few different ways. One is, so as a junior lawyer, let's say coming in, and this applies to all three of the lawyers you talked about, is adopting this business person mindset. So read the book, have a look at that and understand what that means. That changes everything. It starts with mindset, and that applies to everyone. Then I would say, as I mentioned earlier, I think even the most junior lawyer can start to play in the business partnering space. That's something you can do quite easily, even from day one, using common sense. I call it your business. You have actually a lot of what I call business partnering assets, even if you've never done this much before. And that's just common sense, the attention to detail, all those skills that you've learned as a lawyer that you've only applied to legal work, you can apply to business partnering. A junior lawyer can do that pretty easily. Mid-career lawyer can be starting to getting involved a little more in internal business work, if they haven't already, helping out the department, understanding, supporting, if there's legal ops, working with them to help do things, understanding how all that works to help the department, but also then starting to look for business leadership opportunities. And you may not have time to necessarily go drive a project and be the leader of the project, a multi-year project, but you might at least, and I explain these in the book, there's different levels of business leadership. Merely pointing out a business problem or an opportunity and then escalating that to the appropriate functional colleagues, that's business leadership. You've pointed something out, and that doesn't take a whole lot of time. So mid-career lawyers can do that. As you get to more senior levels, then obviously what you will happen, and I've got in the book, I have this thing I call the T-shaped lawyer spectrum, which what happens, and I think most senior lawyers will relate to this, the further you progress in your career, the less legal work you actually do and the more internal business work and client business work you end up doing. And so that's the spectrum that you will see, and therefore you should be, by that point in time, very much be involved in internal business work, helping the legal department to run efficiently and effectively, but also doing a lot of client business work, not just business partnering, but also business leadership, and try to help innovate for the company as a whole. So that's the spectrum of how. And lastly, the other thing I would say is, so my second book, which I hope to have published by the end of the year or early next year, is the framework. So what we've been talking about up until now is the vision of what a T-shaped lawyer is and why. The framework, how to become a T-shaped lawyer, really involves a combination of skills, competencies, qualities, mindsets, and knowledge. Not just skills. Everyone talks about figuring out what skills do we need in this new age. Well, you can't possibly answer that question until you first answer the question of what do you want to be and what are you going to use those skills for? I see it all the time on LinkedIn. It drives me crazy. You can't answer the question of what skills you need until you answer the first question, which is why I wrote the first book first and the second book second. So the second book will explain a very comprehensive framework of specific skills, competencies, qualities, mindsets, and knowledge in order to be a T-shaped lawyer.
This was very thorough, and I love the insights and the how and whys and what. And that was very helpful. We covered a lot of ground, Peter, and sadly our time is coming to the end. I would like for you to maybe give one takeaway that folks can either put into practice right away or do to maybe change their future in their in-house department.
That's true. What I haven't mentioned actually up until now is that we've been talking about the individual lawyer level, which I know is the audience for this particular podcast. But you need to be doing this at both an individual, ideally, and a team, a legal department level. So we haven't talked about the legal department level. There's stuff that legal leaders should be doing. And I have a framework for that as well. It's part of a workshop I do. So ideally, you'd be doing this in conjunction. But to answer your question, if it's a takeaway, what I would say is really back to the point I made earlier, be clear and precise about your change objectives And I cover this in the second book that I'm just literally finishing off now. So it's thinking about what I call the personal dimension, aligning the personal with the professional. In fact, aligning your personal with your professional. And the way to do that, I'll explain in the book, but the connection between the two, your personal and your professional, is your vision. In other words, what do you want to be? What are you aspiring to be? Whether that's a GC or not even a lawyer at all. Think about that, and that will then inform the skills and the competencies and the qualities and the mindset and the knowledge that you need. So be clear about that, and then be clear about the language you use when you're describing change. They're the two things I would say.
This was very helpful. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining and sharing, first of all, the importance of vision in your legal career, your in-house legal career, the strategies that the T-shaped lawyer framework provides, and then appropriate resource allocation if you want to follow them. That was very exciting and liberating to see that you can apply this framework as an individual, as a leader on a team, both as a lawyer and a legal professional that could be a legal operations or any other legal professional that we increasingly see in legal department. So thank you so much for sharing your framework. I encourage folks to check out the books and the framework and apply it to their career, their legal departments, and their individual adventures as in-house professionals. See you next time, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
For stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.